What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? It's Matty Peverell joining you for another War Room Series podcast, reacting to the first real day of NFL free agency, the first day where we hear all the tampering come out. Really exciting news. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers signing in Patrick Peterson, or the signing that will come live when the new league year starts on March 15th. March 15th for me tomorrow. So, down here in Australia, a day ahead of everyone else. So it's going to feel more like free agency starting. But I want to start off before we get into Patrick Peterson by sort of reacting to some of the deals we've seen around the league, what that might mean for the Steelers, and sort of how things are shaping up going into really, sort of the next couple of days and where people are going to fall. So the first thing that I wanted to do, we're just going to run through them. I'm just going to go team by team. We're going to try and nail this really, really quickly. Buffalo Bills, get Connor McGovern, really key guy for them. In terms of beefing up that O-line. Re-signed ex-Steeler Tyler Matakevich, really big on special teams. That's a 2-year deal that voids after year one, so that, they're going to see what they can do there, but splitting the salary cap out. They restructured Stephon Diggs and Allen as well, Josh Allen, I'm pretty sure too. Re-signed Matt Milano, we saw that a couple of weeks ago, or about a week ago. That pretty much meant that Tremaine Edmunds was out. Smart for them. Remember, they play a 4-3. Even he can still rush the quarterback, so really keep him on. And then they signed Sam Martin, their punter, who's a pretty reliable punter. We've seen him around the league. Miami Dolphins bring in Mike White. He was on a 2-year deal. Surprised I don't have the numbers there, but from a Mike White perspective, I think it was like 2 years for about $10-11 million. It's about 5.85, similar to the Patrick Peterson guaranteed money. But I think that's about 5 to 6 per million a year there. David Long signed. He was someone that I've seen some people on Steelers social media mock to the Steelers in terms of mocking from free agency. He signed a 2-year, $11 million deal from Tennessee. They obviously acquired Jalen Ramsey. I'm not going to go over that. We know that that one's sort of been covered to date. New England Patriots re-signed James Ferentz on a 1-year deal that's $200,000 guaranteed. He's a depth piece for them. Roquan McMillan signed a 1-year, $1.6 million contract. That was a re-signing worth up to $2.2 million in incentives. That's probably tackle-based, I would assume. Jonathan Jones re-signed their cornerback, one of their top cornerbacks. I think he's now over 30, though, but on a 2-year, $20 million deal with $13 million guaranteed. So kind of a little bit similar sort of money to what sort of Sutton was getting there. But yeah, it was a smart signing for them. They're really big on their secondary defense. And then all the defensive plays in the secondary. Quincy Williams re-signed the linebacker for the New York Jets on a 3-year, $18 million deal that maxes out with $21 million in incentives. That just takes another linebacker off the market. Obviously, we know about the trade with the Baltimore Ravens for Chuck Clark. They re-signed the kicker, Greg Zerline, on a 1-year deal for $3.5, kind of a standard amount for a decent, top half of the league kicker. Lamar Jackson, obviously the only move that Baltimore's made right now with the non-exclusive franchise tag. I personally don't think Lamar's going to play in Baltimore this year, but we'll see how it plays out. Jermaine Pratt re-signed with the Bengals, 3-year, $21 million deal. He's pretty big for them in sub-package. He receives $10.35 million in year one, $15.15 million over 2 years. So basically team-friendly for a third year. He'll be pretty old too, because I think he's 29 this year. Ethan Pocic re-signs, and that's how we pronounce it in Australia, from my experience with Slavic names, but maybe it's pronounced differently in the US, but he re-signs on a 3-year, $18 million deal. Dalvin Tomlinson signs a 4-year, $57 million contract from the Vikings or the Giants. I can't remember which team he's on. So I'm on the Vikings in my Madden game at the moment. But anyway, he was someone that was mocked to the Steelers as well to show up the defensive line. Interesting 4-year, $57 million contract. I thought Javon Hargrave and him would have a closer number, but Javon Hargrave would be more. We're going to get to the 49ers. Javon Hargrave signed a much bigger deal than that. And they signed Edge Obo Okorowanako. I know I butchered that name then. But he signed a 3-year, $19 million deal, maxing out at $22 million. So they spent a bit of money there, and they did a restructure for Deshaun Watson's contract as well. Then we get to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know they signed Patrick Peterson on a $14 million deal that includes $5.85 million guaranteed. We'll get to that, a bit later on in this show. That's really the only move the Steelers kind of made so far. But it's kind of interesting because, we re-signed Christian Kuntz, And there's a few other little moves that we made as well. They're not on here. It's kind of a bit funny, but at the end of the day, that was a re-signing. But they've got other players that are re-signing here. Kind of weird. I don't love their trackers, but I know over the cap, wait till they've got monetary details. So some of these deals weren't going to be on there. Otherwise, I'd be using over the cap, who I super trust. Houston Texans signed Case Keenum as backup quarterback to probably the rookie or whoever they draft on a 2-year, $6.25 million deal that includes $4 million guaranteed. There's also up to $2 million in incentives. Robert Woods signed there. We know that from a couple of days ago. That's a 2-year, $15.25 million deal that has a max value of $17 million. Again, there's probably incentives there. Andrew Beck, the tight end, signed a 2-year, $6.75 million deal. I thought that was a bit overinflated for him, but good on him. Scott Quessenberry re-signed with them as well. Chase Winovich is expected to sign, so I don't know what that looks like in terms of a deal yet. Hassan Ridgeway signed a 1-year, $3.25 million contract that has a max value of $4 million with incentives. MJ Stewart, the safety, re-signed on a 2-year deal worth $7.5 million. That includes $1.5 million signing bonus and $750,000 in annual incentives. And Jimmy Ward is apparently expected to sign with the Texans as well. Whew, breath. Indianapolis Colts signed Tyquan Lewis, the edge rusher, to a 1-year, $2.1 million deal. EJ Speed, the linebacker, to a 2-year, $9 million deal. Again, I thought it was a little bit high from him, but fair enough. Matt Gay signed a 4-year, $22.5 million deal as their kicker. That kind of tells you everything you need to know with the run game and kicking game. That's how they want to play the game. Jacksonville Jaguars re-signed CJ Beathard to back up Trevor Lawrence on a 2-year, $4.5 million contract. I kind of like that from them. He's a guy that's got a lot of experience. He can win you a game or two if needed, or close out a game if needed. So I think that's helpful for Jacksonville. Again, it takes another quarterback off the market. It makes it a smaller chance, reduces the markets or teams that Mason Rudolph can go to as well. But I do think we'll hear something about Mason Rudolph quite quickly. Tight end Evan Ingram got the non-exclusive franchise tag. That's a transition tag. Roy Robertson Harris signed a 3-year, $30 million extension on the D-line. Again, I was kind of surprised at that, but fair enough. Good on you. Andre Dillard agreed to a 3-year, $29 million contract. He's an ex-Philadelphia Eagle. Morgan Cox, a long snapper, signed a 1-year extension. That's Tennessee Titans. We moved down. Okay, yeah, they've done this by the categories. Denver Broncos signed Jared Stidham. Interesting, following Hackett over. Not following Hackett. Hackett left there. But he's basically going to the Broncos. I find that interesting on a 2-year, $10 million contract. Half of that's guaranteed. Christian Manhertz, the tight end, signed with them as well. Ben Powers signed a 4-year, $52 million deal. Mike McGlinchey signed a 5-year, $87.5 million deal. Zach Allen, the D-line, agreed to a 3-year, $45 million contract. I was shocked. I thought that was a massive deal with $32.5 guaranteed. And they signed Alex Singleton to a 3-year, re-signed him to an $18 million contract with $9 million guaranteed. They've spent something like $219 million, I think I read correctly, the most out of anyone in the NFL so far in this tampering period, which is crazy. Jawan Taylor goes to Kansas City on a 4-year, $80 million deal. 60 guaranteed. He replaces Orlando Brown. Kind of interesting from that perspective, particularly the narrative on Jawan Taylor going into last season's free agency where he re-signed the deal, or it might have been tagged with Jacksonville. Las Vegas signed Jimmy Garoppolo. I kind of find that funny. I don't think this is going to work out well. If you're Devontae Adams, you're probably really pissed off. But, if Michael Thomas leads the Saints at some point in the next season or two, you could imagine Devontae Adams finding his way over there. Amir Abdullah signs a running back for them as well. They put Josh Jacobs on the non-exclusive tag, so they bring back their 2 running backs. They've got Marcus Epps signing a 2-year, $12 million deal with $8 million guaranteed. The Chargers re-signed their depth quarterback in Easton Stick and Eric Kendricks. Now, that's kind of interesting given, he's their linebacker, not Kenneth Murray, the Queen. No, I think he's kind of Murray. They were in the same draft class. Anyway, it's interesting they bring in Eric Kendricks, a bit of a lighter, faster sort of, linebacker there. Dallas Cowboys, we know they put the tag on Tony Pollard. Daniel Jones agreed to a contract. We've covered that before on War Room and also on Steelers touchdown under shows and Mad Monday. Saquon Barkley got their own exclusive tag. Sterling Shepard had a $1.3 million deal now as he had a fall from grace. Raheem Nunez-Roches agreed to a contract. We don't know what that is. Gerard Davis re-signed. Don't know what that looks like. They brought in Bobby Okereke from the Indianapolis Colts on a 4-year, $40 million contract with 22 guaranteed. That's a good signing for them, particularly with Shaquille Leonard. So that kind of brings into the sort of that play. Re-signed their punter too on a $4 million deal, worth up to $5 million in incentives. Philadelphia's apparently got Kelsey coming back, and Brandon Graham re-signed on a 1-year deal for $6 million. We're almost there. Washington signed Andrew Wiley, the tackle, on a 3-year, $24 million contract, average $8 per year. Signed Nick Gates as well for $16.5 million. Obviously put the tag on Deron Payne, and then he signed a 4-year, $90 million deal, which I think is kind of interesting from their D-line perspective. Then they signed Cody Barton again. He's a good linebacker in this league, and they re-signed David Mayo. So that's kind of interesting perspective. Cameron Dantzler was claimed off waivers from the Vikings. He could be really good in that defense. I kind of like that. Can Ron Rivera get a performance out of him close, like, a Josh Norman light, maybe? And they signed Danny Johnston, not a guy I'm super familiar with. Chicago obviously made the big trade that got them DJ Moore. They re-signed their fullback. They signed Nate Davis to protect Justin Fields, which I think is a really good thing for them. Edge DeMarcus Walker. They had the massive blockbuster deal, 4-year, $72 million contract for Tremaine Edmonds. Again, a target that we sort of thought might go to the Steelers. They signed TJ Edwards as well, another guy that you probably thought the Steelers could get on the cheap. Kind of makes me think they're going to keep Jack now. But yeah, they've splashed some cash as well. So pretty massive from them. They've got a bunch of draft picks. If they trade back again, which some people are rumoring them to do, it's going to be nuts. Former Steeler Isaiah Buggs re-signs a 2-year deal for $6 million at Detroit. He was someone that was playing practice squad that was cut. This is really good for him. I'm excited for him. Craig Reynolds re-signed with them, their running back. They brought in Alex Anzalone on a 3-year, $18 million deal. I think he's ex-Saints. They brought in, obviously, Cameron Sutton from the Steelers, 3-year, $33 million deal, 21.5 guaranteed. Similar numbers per year to Jonathan Jones that we talked about earlier on the show. Green Bay Packers, they've only done kick return, punt returner. They're probably waiting for all the Aaron Rodgers stuff to fall before they start doing things. And, particularly if you're getting a trade and another player is going to be sent back to the Packers. Vikings, Josh Oliver, agreed a 3-year, $21 million deal, guaranteed, the tight end. So they're using a lot of tight ends, even though they've released Thielen. And they signed Marcus Davenport to a 1-year, $13 million contract, edge rusher out of the Saints. So I thought that was kind of interesting. NFC South re-signed. So we're looking at Atlanta Falcons. They re-signed their top guard in a 5-year, $105 million extension. I really like Lindstrom, but that makes James Daniels' contract like heaven. They acquired Johnny Smith in a trade from New England. I think that's going to be really good for them and for their running game. Edge Lorenzo Carter re-signed on a 2-year deal. Brought in David Onyemata. He agreed a 3-year deal for $35 million. They brought in Caden Ellis, who on a 3-year deal. Signed Jesse Bates on a 4-year, $64 million deal, $23 million in year 1. Kind of crazy. You kind of thought that Cincinnati would try and keep him, but they do have to find money for Joe Burrow. And so, yeah, you're gonna struggle with a guy like to keep that on contract. Bradley Pinion, their punter, agreed to a 3-year deal. And then the Saints signed Derek Carr. We know about that. 4-year. After the trade, he had signed a 4-year, $150 million contract. Re-signed James Winston on a deal for $8 million 1 year. John Johnson, the tight end, signed a 2-year, $12 million contract extension. He would have been an RFA, so that's fair. They save all the tendering. They signed a defensive end and a defensive back. Jamal Dean re-signed with the Bucks, the cornerback. We have nothing for the Cardinals yet. The Rams have only done that move with Ramsey for their tight end Hunter Long. San Francisco signed Sam Darnold, Javon Hargrave, so they're kind of the big names there. Sean Gibson re-signed their safety. They signed a 1-year extension for one of their D linemen, Kevin Gibbons, and their long snapper. A lot of long snapper deals this free agency. And then cornerback Geno Smith re-signed 3 years, $75 million deal with the Seahawks. That makes sense. That gives them surety of the position. Don't rule out them getting a quarterback later in this draft. They're probably going to wait to do that till the next draft. I still think they're a sort of target for a Mason Rudolph, to be quite frank. And they signed Jamonte Jones to boost up their D-line on a 3-year, $51 million contract. So what can we glean out of all of this? Number one, long snappers are being prioritized. No. Quarterbacks going off the board pretty quickly. D-linemen going off the board pretty quickly. But they're not just that. They're actually getting paid a lot of money. Cam Hayward starts to look cheap by these standards. You've got a number of linebackers going off the board and cornerbacks too. I saw one of the trends being wide receiver, so nothing's really happened. But again, this is only day one of the tampering period. But definitely a big moves on defense. Big moves on defense rather than tackles going everywhere and wide receivers and that sort of stuff. So kind of interesting. And the top running backs have all been tagged. So it kind of shows you the value of a running back in the first round, particularly late. If you can get them on the 5-year contract and then tag them 6 years, then you can, choose to let them go. Right, so that covers off the reacting to free agency side of things. Hopefully that gave you a bit more context, gave you a feel for some of the moves being made. So, wanted to talk about Patrick Peterson. We're going to go to our friends over at Pro Football Reference, namely their StatHead program or feature that you've got to pay for. I do pay for that, $8 a month. Love it. Really helpful for the shows. We've got a cool tool, a player comparison tool. Now, the problem I've got, and we'll try and do it live for you, and hopefully it won't stuff up with the internet, but you can't compare players, this many players of 6, and I compared the full 6, and different career lengths. We can do it, and we're going to try and do it. I'll do it for Patrick Peterson and Cam Sutton, but I wanted to show you sort of measure Patrick Peterson against 5 cornerbacks. The 5 that I've done and why I've done them. J.C. Jackson was kind of the top guy last year in the free agency process. Ended up signing from the Patriots, went to the Chargers. Steven Nelson, because he was the highest Steelers free agent acquisition, or most expensive one up until last year. Might even still be, but no, I think it was up until last year until the James Daniels. Patrick Peterson, we've obviously just brought in. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Would love if he retired a Steeler went to the Hall of Fame as a Steeler. I don't think that'll happen unless in the Super Bowl. Jalen Ramsey, just because he's a big name and he was the big target everyone supposedly wanted. That was never a free agent this season. Cam Sutton, because he left, and Levi was because we brought him in last year, and I think he's had I think he played quite well, and I also think because he stays on the roster, it makes sense. Cool. First of all, one player from this 6 played in the playoffs last year. Patrick Peterson, number 1. Number 2, when you look at games played per year, J.C. Jackson did get injured. I think it was an ACL or a hamstring off the top of my head. So that doesn't count. In terms of tackles, Patrick Peterson, second behind Jalen Ramsey with 56, playing in 17 games. I don't know why Jalen Ramsey... Oh, it was 17 games. Season 1, I think. Assists on tackles, 24 for Jalen Ramsey, only 10 for Patrick Peterson. But basically, so Patrick Peterson ends up with 66 tackles, which is second on the list behind Jalen Ramsey's 88. Quarterback hits, you've got 2 for Jalen Ramsey, 1 for Steven Nelson. Tackles for a loss, 4 for Jalen Ramsey, 3 for Patrick Peterson, so he still gets physical. Steven Nelson had a sack, Jalen Ramsey had 2 sacks. And when you look at interceptions, 5 interceptions. 5 interceptions from Patrick Peterson last year at his age. Incredible. And yards, he had 91 yards off those, which was definitely the highest average there. So pretty cool from that perspective. Now, if we'll go into Patrick Peterson's stats as well, but I'm going to try and pull up. We'll go entire career for Cam Sutton, and we'll go entire career. Here we go. We can compare multiple. Here we go. Yeah, we can go entire career for Cam Sutton. We will go 2017 to 2022 for Patrick Peterson. We will go 2018. So remember, Levi Wallace has played a year less. So when we do his one, we will go 2017 to, because particularly because it's the Steelers with Steven Nelson. We will do the same thing. We'll do the Sutton years to 2022. We'll get rid of JC. Well, I entered the league. All right, so we're going to do it all. That's right. I figured it out. So there we go. All right, so I gave you 2022. Now we're going to look at overall production since 2017 or later. Now we say 17 because that's when Cam Sutton went to the league. So I really want to compare this to Cameron Sutton. So AV, if you're not familiar with that, that is the approximation value that Pro Football Reference assigned to each player based on their production in a season and compares that against their peers. In a really good year, like a Ben Roethlisberger gets like a 15, 16, 17, when he's having sort of, top 10 in the league sort of performance. 71's pretty crazy for Jalen Ramsey. If you're getting over 110 as a cornerback, you're probably in the Hall of Fame, definitely. If you're getting over 60, 70, depending on what you do in the league, that's pretty good. Now, remember, what I've done here is just 17 to 22. So these numbers are going to be bigger for some of these players, or probably all of them, actually, really. AV, Cameron Sutton has the least. Not surprising. Remember, he's a third-round pick there. Was sort of brought into the Steelers, learned to grow. You look at the games overall played, Cam Sutton's fourth highest there. Now, Levi Wallace and J.C. Jackson started in 2018, so they're going to have played at least 16 to 17 games less. This won't count. It shouldn't count up playoffs in this number. If you look at solo tackles, Jalen Ramsey's got the most. Obviously, plays a really high snap count during this period. Patrick Peterson also had some injuries in this period in the last 5 years, but he's second on that list. So really important there. Quarterback hits, he's behind Cameron Sutton with 1. Doesn't really play as much safety as what Sutton's done for the Steelers. Equally, a lot more injured. And that's why the games, I think, he's played more than Cameron Sutton, but kind of a different thing. Tackles for a loss, Patrick Peterson, second on that list. Sacks, tied for first with Sutton, Ramsey, Peterson. You kind of see why Sutton did get his contract. I said that he had valuation on some of my shows last week of $8.5 million. I always thought he was going to get between 8.5 to 10, and that's what he did. Forced fumbles, you've got 1 from Peterson, 5 from Sutton, 5 from Ramsey. So this is where it starts to even out in the pack a little bit. So overall interception, rather than just about the yard side of things. J.C. Jackson, 25, Ramsey, 17, Patrick Peterson, 14, more than Cameron Sutton's 8. So with that, and the problem with I only think about these graphs is it doesn't tell you the yards that he's allowed. We'll get into that specifically with Patrick Peterson to be able to compare the two. But as you can see, considering we don't have 17 million on our roster, J.C. Jackson signed for an average, I think, of like 13.5 per year or something like that last year. I haven't overplayed for Levi Wallace. Steven Nelson, I think, re-signing with the Texans on like a $6 to $7 million deal. But he went to them on like a $9 million contract last year. The Steelers, this was a really smart pickup with Patrick Peterson. Really smart pickup. Now, if we go to Patrick Peterson's stats specifically over the last few years, so this is where we can do a few more things. Advanced stats, which start 2018, interestingly, considering we're talking about Cam Sutton and what he's done. Kind of interesting from that perspective in terms of what Patrick Peterson's been able to do. He's allowed a completion rate of as low as 56.6% since 2018. The most he's allowed was 67%. He's allowed no more than 700 yards in any season. Now, that was last year. That was the most. But he was asked to do a lot. They didn't have a strong cornerback room in the Vikings. But his yards per completion was a career high, so that's something he'll want to move on from. He had 12.9 in 2019, but also this is kind of more difficult when it depends on the coverage and the scheme and who he's marking up against. To me, this suggests he's still marking up against the top wide receivers in the league. Yards per target, though, was overall down, so he's disrupting the plays. He allowed 4 touchdowns last year. That was he allowed more. 5 last year. He allowed, 4 in 2020. 5 in 2020 as well. 4 in 2018. 4 in 2019. The quarterback rating, though, that he had last year was the lowest he's had, second lowest he's allowed in the last 5 seasons, and it was only just under 0.1 difference to his lowest. So 79.6 was the quarterback rating he allowed. He had 2 blitzes, no hurries, that kind of thing. Missed tackles, 4.3% missed tackles. That's incredible at that level. Kind of, I think with defensive backs, if you're missing somewhere like 8 to 11%, it's kind of acceptable. Minka actually scores quite highly in this if you look back on it. But 4.3% is incredible from a 32-year-old quarterback that is playing, a bunch of snaps enough, playing all 17 games. And we can look at his snaps as well. I'm really impressed when I see that sort of a number. If you do look at snap counts, like he played 95% of the snaps in the games that he played in last year. And he's never had 92% or less in his career in terms of snaps in games he's been able to play. Pretty incredible. And you look at the seasons and what he's done. He's played more than 10 games in every single season. So he's a really healthy guy. And he's contributed on special teams as well. Even at 32, 17% of special team snaps. So, when you think about Patrick Peterson, this is a guy that is making a true contribution. When it comes to the secondary, he's a guy that can produce. Forget the age. Everyone will keep saying, smart people saying that on Twitter. It is true. Forget the age. He can return punts and kicks. I don't think he's not been doing that since 2018. I don't think we're going to see that from him at the Steelers. But it shows you it's sort of a hallmark or a support for his overall athleticism. So, yeah, you really love to see this from him, in terms of what he's been able to do in terms of the league. But he's been compared of a similar career quality and shape to Mel Blount, Troy Polamalu, Darrell Revis, based on stats alone. Everyone talks about him being a Hall of Famer. That's what he's going to be. He's played 168 games in the league, played over 11,000 defensive snaps. Pretty incredible. Played 46 offensive snaps. Wow, I didn't know that. But definitely a guy here, as I said, you've got a guy that's not allowed, and as far as these advanced stats go back, more than 700 yards in a season. As simple as 2021, when he played in 13 games, he only allowed 477. He's coming off a really, really positive year, better year than, or an equivalent year to what Sutton had. This is a great pickup by the Steelers, particularly with the money we're going to pay him. Get a savvy veteran. I don't think the Steelers are drafting a cornerback in round 1. I just don't. But if they do, or they draft one early, whenever they're going to draft one, this is a guy that can mentor that next great Steelers cornerback. I love this. Steeler fans, get on board. This is what we want, and get on board for the moves to come. If you missed the show that I did with Marky D for Mad Monday, go back and listen to that. I talked about everyone was going to do that meme with the stick figure poking the Steelers logo. That's exactly what happened. The Steelers wait for other teams to overspend, and then they go get guys, as I said last week on our Steelers War Room show, that provide value in production and snaps. And remember, the Steelers had 34.7% of their defensive snaps from last year leaving or potentially leaving in free agency this year. We've only one player from the Steelers has been signed so far from the defense, and that's Cam Sutton. There's still a bunch of guys we can go re-sign. But with that, that's going to wrap up this Steelers War Room. As I said, enjoy this free agency period and everything that it brings, the frenzy, the madness, all the rest of it. And as Marky D would always say, go Steelers.